We're now on Daf Ayin Ches Amid Beis, and we're explaining the Mechzal Mechza Safek Megureshes in our Mishnah as a case where he and her were situated exactly 8 amos apart, and each one was Kona 4 amos, and the get is Yotze mi Arba Amashalo li Arba Amashalo. So part of the get is within her Arba Amos, part of the get is within his Arba Amos, and that's called Mechzal Mechza. Why? Because on the one hand, the get is in her rishus, but on the other hand, the get is in his rishus. So we have a real suffix, what I call the suffix gomer. There's not a suffix in Yediyah here. No Yediyah will help you. We have all the facts on the ground so crystal clear, but what is the halacha? Is this considered an asina get? Did the get go from his rishus to hers or not? We don't know. On the one hand, the get is partially in her rishus, and therefore that's enough. On the other hand, the get is partially in his rishus, and therefore never left his rishus. It's not an asina. The Rishonim actually offer a slightly different scenario here to explain this suffix mechzal mechza. Let's say there was a third party, not the Baal and not the Isha. He was located in a certain spot, and he was Kona Dalet Amos. And that Dalet Amos is his within this 8 amma distance between him and her. Now he picks up and he leaves, and the get falls exactly where he was before. And therefore, both he, the Baal, and she, the Miskareshes, both are Kona, the place that he now evacuated. And they both have equal kinyonim of Dalet Amos in that place, Sha'azan. Other Rishonim reject that because he cannot acquire Dalet Amos with regard to a get. He has no shaykhis to a get. The kinyan Dalet Amos of a person was established by virtue of Takonis Chachamim. When that kinyan is relevant to that person, then they gave him the Dalet Amos. Frekti Gemara v'Agid Gabei. After all, since half the get is in the rishus of the Baal, that's not considered krisus. Krisus means v'nosan biyada, and he was kores by giving it into her rishus. Here, it's still partially in his rishus. We need a complete krisus. And at this point, the Gemara rejects the answer of mechzal mechz in a case of Dalet Amos, but rather Rav Yosef Chambayu hacham b'shtei kitei eidim askinu. We have a contradiction between two pairs of Eidim. And one pair of Eidim, Achas Omer's Karov Law, I testify that the get landed closer to him, to the Baal. Achas, another pair of two Eidim, contradict the first pair of Eidim, and they claim that the get fell Karov Law. And now we have a suffix. Which one of these two pairs of Eidim is telling the truth? And this really depends on an entire sugi in Yevamos Daf Lamed Aleph called Treu Trey. And the Gemara concludes that in Treu Trey, we don't go back to a chazaka. Hechmiru chachamim shelo la'amid al chazkasa. Because otherwise, our Gemara makes no sense. Why would the Gemara say that it's mechzal mechzal? She's a safek gerushin. If we have Treu Trey, we should go back to the chazaka. And her chazaka was that she's an Eishes Ish. But the answer is supplied by the Gemara in Yevamos Lamed Aleph that the Rabbanu were machmir, and in Trey they made it into a suffix. And we don't rely on chazaka because the logic is the same to Eidim who say that she is megureshes, it was Karov Law, then makrish the chazaka that she had as an Eishes Ish prior, and they are believed over and above the chazaka. So the bottom principle here is Ein ma'midim doral chazaka b'treu trei. Now, all this is according to Rav, who says that karov lo is b'toch arba amos, and we could explain the mechzal mechza megureshes ve'ena megureshes like Rav and Rav Yosef. It's shtei kitei machishos, whether it was karov lo. Rav Yochanan Amar karov lo shoninu afilu mea amma. V'karav lo shaninu afilu mea ama. Rabbi Yochanan says, forget about Dalet Amos. Rav interpreted our Mishnah in the light of Dalet Amos, and the Takonis Chachamim that a Dalet Amos is like a person's chotz and it's kona no, says Rabbi Yochanan. We're trying to define the Maisa Nesina. Was there Nesina to her or not? Hechi Domi, what's the case according to Rabbi Yochanan? Mechzal mech. So what's mechzal mech according to Rabbi Yochanan? Again, it could be even mea ama according to Rabbi Yochanan's Kohen. And the Gemara is going to explain why. But what would be mechzal mech? So Rav Shaman. Bar Abel Ididim Mefarsh Lemine Rabbi Yochanan. I had a Kabbalah how to interpret Rabbi Yochanan. Hu yachol l'shomra vehi ein yachol l'shomra zeu karvlo. He yachol l'shomro vehu ein no yachol l'shomro zeu karvlo. When I was a child, we used to play a game called Snatch the Bag. I don't know if you're familiar with that game. So I was here and she was here, or I was here and he was here. And the question is, who could get the bag first? So basically what's happening is the get falls in a place which might be closer to the Isha. What does it mean closer to the Isha? It doesn't mean it's within her Arba Amos, but rather she could be Shomer the get, and he can't, meaning she has access to the get before he does. Again, the get may be 100 Amos away from her, but she's Speedy Gonzalez. She could run and get the get and hoard the get for herself. That's called Karav La. If the get finds itself landing in a place where he can get the get before she can, that's called Karav La. But Shneim Yechol L'Shomro, either if both can get access to the get, or Shneim Einam Yechol L'Shomro, neither of them can get access to the get. They can only get access to the get if they work in tandem, Shneim B'Yachad. That's called Zeu Mechzal Mechzal. That's Sofik Megureshes. Amru Rabbana Kamei Rabbi Yochanan, Mishmei Rabbi Yona's son Hachi. And when they told the same idea, the same interpretation of our Mishnah to Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yonasan, Omar, he was amazed with Sheva. Yodin Chavrin Bavloi Lefrusheki Haitaiva. Even the Babylonians, our colleagues from Bavel, he was so despoiled, are able to interpret the Mishnah properly. We thought only the Israelis know how to interpret the Mishnah. Tanya Nami Hachi. We have a brayso to support Rabbi Yochanan. That karov in the Mishnah means Yachol Shomra. Rabbi Lezer Omer Kol Shehu Karov Lo Milo. In other words, it's more karov to her than him. Uba Kelev in Utolo, and a Kelev came and took the get. Eina Megureshes. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Eina Megureshes. Wait a minute. At the moment that the get fell, it was karov La. And she was ready Megureshes. Who cares what happens afterwards if a Kelev comes and takes the get? Kol Hechi Dinterev Tezel. She could be Shomer the get. El Alav Hachi Kamer. We have to reinterpret this brayso. Kol Shekarov La Milo. Even in a case where the get is closer to her than to him, and she, l'chora, could be the first one to snatch up the get and get control and guard the get. Iluba kevel in Nintolo, but a Kelev came and took it away. V'hu yachol l'shomro, but he ain't yachol l'shomro. Rashi interprets this as meaning that there's a hefsek nohar or a tail ofar beino levein get. So even though the get is physically closer to her than to him, she will not be able to save the get from the Kelev. The Kelev will get to the get and snatch it away before she can get to the get, because there's a hefsek of a tail offer or a nar. Is Eina Megureshes, and that supports Rabbi Yochanan that the kinyan of the get depends upon her yecholas, her potential to be shomer the get. So again, even though it's closer to her than it is to him, Eina Megureshes, because she is stuck with a hefsek nar. And Eina Yechol L'Shom. Now we have a third interpretation of our Mishnah. Amalei Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda Shinina. Right, Shmuel called Rabbi Yehuda by the nickname Shinina, meaning very sharp. What does it mean, Karov law? Kidesha tasuach v'titlenu. She could bend over and grab the get. She doesn't have to move 1 inch from the spot. What's Karov law? That he could bend down and grab the get. What's mechzal mechza? When both of them are close enough to the get that they can each and every one of them be notilis again. Bend down and grab the get. And Shmuel tells his Talmidim, V'at lo tavid uvda adamoti gita liyod. If such a question comes your way, and the Baal threw the get to his wife, and Rashi points out here Tosfos points out here it's in Rishus HaRabim. Even if the get landed so close to her that she can bend down and pick up the get, don't rely on this to be matir, this woman, and allow her to get married until the get finally comes into her hands. Because we're afraid of Gzeira Shema Yipal Get Rachok Menu, that maybe the get will fall further than that, and people will think, you know what? It's Nafal Karvla. So make sure that she has the get. So no one should think that it fell Karvla in a case where it didn't come anywhere near her. It was at a distance. And here, the Gemara's language of Mati Liyada implies that the Baal himself doesn't have to actually give the get into her hands. She just has to make sure that she picks up the get. And this is not considered Tli Gita Karka because the Baal actually threw the get, Karov law, in a way that she can bow and pick up the get, and therefore the Maisa Nesina was a complete Nesina. There was a case of a Baal that threw the get, Karov law, but she didn't get the get. It was Karov law Kadesh Tasuach v'Titlena. She could bend down and pick up the get, but she never actually got the get. And they required, with the death of the Baal, Chalitza to be matir the Yavama, Lashuk, considering it as if she was not Megureshes, but rather she was an Almana. And this is based on the Chumr of Shmuel, that we don't consider her Megureshes until the get comes to our hands. The Mishnah established that Zrikas HaKedushin, if it falls Karov law, Megureshes, Karov law, and Megureshes, Maksamesses, some Mekudeshes, Omer Rav Asi, Omer Rav Yochanan, when the Mishnah says Karov law, Megureshes, and we saw in Rav Yochanan that Yechola Lishmar, even if it's B'merchak Arba, Mea Amos, Legittin Amru V'lo L'Dover Acher. This is valid with regard to get, but not with regard to Piron Chov if the lover throws the money of payment to the Malva and the most full Karv LaMalva. And let's say before the Malva got a hold of the most flew away. The Malva was not Kona the Kesef, and the din of Karv Lo doesn't apply, and the Lov is Chayev to replace the money. So the Gemara raises the following question: Eisvei Rabbi Abel Rav Asi v'chein le'inyan kedushin. Wait a second. This is not a separate halacha in Gittin to the exclusion of every other case. Rabbi Yochanan never meant to say Gittin. The Mishnah itself says v'chein le'inyan kedushin, which means that if kedushin were given by him to her Karv Lo, she's mekudeshes. And the Gemara it's a shani hasan d'chsiv v'yatz. We have a Gzeirashav v'yatzav v'hoisa makish havayli yitzia. And all the dinim of Gittin apply to Kedushin and vice versa. Therefore, if this is a valid Nesina of Karv Law for Gittin, then ipso facto, it is valid for Kedushin. So Gemara asks the following kasha. Wait a second. Rabbi Yochanan said that this only works in Gittin. We expanded it to include Kedusha. But certainly it doesn't work in Chov, and yet the Mishnah says in Chov that it all depends on whether he was whether he Zorik Karv Lo, and it landed Karv Lamalv, or Karv Lo, and it didn't land Karv Lamalv. So the Gemara answers, Zrokli Chovius. Well, I'm sorry, this is all part of the Gemara's kasha. Zrokli Chovius Zroka Lo, Karv Lamalva, Soch. Karv Lova, Lozo. So how could that be that this Karv Lo works with regard to Piron Chov, when Rabbi Yochanan says it's a separate halacha Gittin, Mishum Iguna, and the Gemara answers Alchamayas Kin and the Omar Le. The Malva said he explicitly mandated to the Lovas Rokli Chovi V'Tipate. I'm going to be Mochel L'Chov once you Zorikli the Piron, and he accepted. The Malva was willing to accept a Zrika. So then the law is that if the Lova was Zorik the most, and it came Karov Lo to the Malva, even though it didn't actually get to the hands of the Malva was Mochel. So what's the Chiddush over here? Rav Yochanan had to tell me that in such a case, when the Malva was Mochel, the Lova is Potter. Lo tzricha de'amelei zrokli chovi b'toras Gittin. Very strange. The Malva says the Lova, throw the chov the most to me and you'll be potter, but throw it in the way it would be meaningful if it was a get. And the Tana wants to tell me that his kavana in such a case was that if the chov will fall in a place where had the Baal thrown the get to the wife, she would be megureshes, then the Lova is off the hook, he's potter from his chov. If on the other hand it'll fall to a place where in Gittin it would not be considered a gerushin, even though the Baal told him to throw the money, it would not be a valid piron chol. Now, the Rishonim asked the following question. Shmuel earlier said that in Gittin we were machmer and we required not just Karov Law, but also Kedei Shetasur V'Titlena. But yet, with regard to Zrokli Chovi B'Toras Gittin, it doesn't have to come that close to the Malva that he could just bend down and pick it up. And the answer to that is because Shmuel was only machmer as far as get, but not as far as Chov is concerned. Now, if the Malva says to the Lova, Zrokli Chovi V'Toras Gerushin, did he add the word V'Tipoter? I don't see the word V'Tipoter in the Gemara. So in order to understand that, we'll have to read the next line in the Gemara. The Gemara asks, Vakati Mai L'Meimer. If the Baal says, if the Malva said to the Lovas Rokli Chovi B'Toras Gittin, then there's an implicit mechila here. And even though the most never actually were received into the hands of the Malva, nevertheless, there was a piron because the Malva instructed the Lovas Rokli B'Toras Gittin. So what's the chiddush? The Malva could say to the Lova, you know what, I was just joking around. When I said throw it to me B'Toras Gittin, as if it was a get creases, I didn't intend to pati you from the chov, kamash malon. Therefore, the Tana had to teach me that the Malva doesn't have such a taina, and it's not an accepted taina. But he really had a serious commitment to be mochel on the chov through the zrika of, and when the zrika of the lova would take place. But again, we have to add here that the word tipoter was left out deliberately, because if he said v'tipoter, then you can't have even a halamina to say mishat aniba. Amar Rav Chizda, get biyada u'mishicha biyada. If the get was attached to a string, a rope. So if he could pull the get towards him, and remove the get from her hand, that's not called an asina. It never really left his hand. But if he can't be menatik it, the chut is not strong enough to allow him to pull the get out of her hands, then megureshes, my timer. Why is it that if yochel and natko ain't megureshes, the bein increases for liquor? That's why in the Bate Dinim I did shimush. I remember that the dayanim will instruct the isha to open her hands like this and only close her hands after the Baal pulls his hand away. So the Baal puts the get into her open hands. His hand is no longer attached to the get, and only then could she close her hands over the get. Otherwise, if she closes her hand before the Baal pulls his hand out, then it's like Meshicha Biyado. He can still pull the get away. And she did the Nesina by closing her hands. If, let's say, our hand is on an incline, is afal pishay get liyoda zrakallah is enamuguresh, even though he threw the get into her hand, and eventually she was able to grab onto the get. For example, let's say the get, rolled off her hand that's inclined towards the ground, and it fell on the ground. Now she picks up the get. That's not a gerish in Amai. Why isn't it so? You're going to tell me that it's Tli Gita B'Gabi Karka, that he never really gave the get into her hand. She picked up the get from the ground, but nevertheless, the takana was that a get could be kanui to the isha within Arba Amos. So the Gemara answers, below nach. It means the get was destroyed. It went up in smoke before it landed on the ground. Frek the Gemara, I don't care. Who cares if the get burnt up before it landed on the ground? V'tigarish ma'avira di arba amos. Not only do the 4 amos create a chutzah to be kona on behalf of the person who's within the dalet amos, but beyond that, you can be kona through the avir, the airspace of the dalet amos, and that's exactly what happens here in Rabbi Yehuda's statement. We have a suffix of Rabbi Lazar. Arba amos sha'amru yesh lem avir or ein lem avir. Tifshot ein lem avir. So why don't we use this statement and this ruling of Rabbi Yehuda to prove that you can be kona in the avir of dalet amos? No, I'm sorry, that you cannot be kona in the avir of dalet amos because Rabbi Yehuda said that eina megureshes. And the word says, the case is where she was standing right at the brink, at the Sfas Hanor. And therefore, when he put the get into her hands, that's ketafris, that is in an incline, the get falls into the Nar and it gets completely lost. So therefore, even if we were to say that the dalet amos of a person economy avir, which is one side in Rabbi Loz's suffix, nevertheless, that's only what's called avir shesofel anua. But here, meikara leibud koi, from the beginning of the zrika, the get is designated, so to speak, to fall into the nar, and therefore it is not kona bi'av. It's not avir shesofo lonu. And this leads us to the Mishnah Daf Ayin Tes. We'll just go through the Mishnah very quickly. Hoisel medes al rosh hagag. The Baal is down on the ground, and he throws the get onto her gag. And now at one point, the get reaches the avir of the gag. And that means the avir of someone's rishus is kona like the rishus. And she's on the roof. And the get is now on its way down to the roof. And even though a wind could blow away the get, but the moment that the get reaches the avir of her reshus, it's in the avir of the avir of the gag, it's in the avir of her reshus, and she's megureshes. And now let's flip it around, says the Mishnah. Hu milamala. Let's say he's on top of the gag, so he throws upwards in a way that it'll incline over the gag. He lamata, she's in her chotzer on the bottom ground level. There's a zugrakol law. As soon as the get turns into the avir of har chotzer, is that even though nimchako nisraf harezu megureshes, even though the get was completely destroyed before it got to the karka of har chotzer, she's megureshes. Why? Because the moment it was in the avir is avir reshus, is like the reshus for kinyanim purposes. Rashi learns that when the Mishnah adds at the end of the Mishnah nimchak o nisraf, it's going back on the Reisha as well. And therefore, in the case where he throws the get from the ground into the airspace of the Gag, even though it got destroyed after it reached the airspace of the Gag, before it reached the ground of Hagag, she's Meguresh. The Rambam disagrees, and he holds only in the Seifa does the Mishnah quote Nimchak o Nisraf. Then she's Megureshes. In the Seifa, in the case where he's on top throwing it over the ledge of the Gag. But in the Reisha, where she's on the Gag, she's not Megureshes until the get lands on the Gag. But if the get was Nisraf before it landed on the roof, then she's not Megureshes. Okay, then this is where we'll stop for today. And I'll take this opportunity to wish you a great day. Thank you so much.